You know, if you ask 20 different fish keepers what you can stock in a 5-gallon tank, you'll probably get 20 different answers. And you know what? Some may even judge you with a 3-paragraph essay on Reddit explaining why you shouldn't even consider anything less than a 10-gallon tank minimum. What you could stock in a 5-gallon tank is one of the most debated topics in the hobby. Mostly because it is often the entry point for new fish keepers looking to do a little bit more research than just picking up whatever they see at their local fish store. And a lot of the disagreement comes down to variability in experience, how much maintenance you're willing to do, the way your tank is set up, and even what part of the world you live in. And one more thing people don't always think about is that not all 5-gallon tanks are made the same. A tall portrait style tank versus a shallow bookshelf style tank have totally different dynamics. The footprint, the surface area, and the swimming space all impact which kind of species will survive and thrive in a 5-gallon tank. Quick caveat before we dive in. This is by no means a care guide for each of the species I'm going to be talking about. Think of this as a starting list. If a suggestion on this list catches your interest, make sure you do your own due diligence. Let's break it down into 3 buckets. First, the stocking options that are universally safe. Second, the ones that are frequently debated amongst hobbyists. And lastly, the stocking options that are generally discouraged across the board. First, let's get started with the safe bets for your 5-gallon tank. The ones that pretty much everyone agree on. First one being, you guessed it, a Betta fish. They are the quintessential nano centerpiece. They're readily available, colorful, and a good starter fish in general. They're a bit hit or miss in terms of hardiness nowadays, which is largely dependent on where you purchase your Betta fish. But all in all, 5-gallon tanks are widely considered the absolute minimum size for one single Betta. Next, Neocaridina shrimp, like cherry shrimp. These guys are perfect for nanos. They breed readily in aged tanks, they're entertaining to watch, and because they have such a low bioload, you could keep them in a 5-gallon tank without worrying about too much waste being produced. And that means you could keep them safely in a 5-gallon without overloading your filter. You can also consider Caridina, but your own experience level should be assessed because Caridina, like crystal reds for example, require a bit more attention and effort to achieve adequate water parameters. Then we've got snails. Nerite snails, ramshorns, or mystery snails. There are a plethora of options to consider with amazing different shell patterns and colors to choose from. Not only do they serve as an excellent cleanup crew, but they don't add nearly as much waste as fish do. Just note that mystery snails specifically are a bit heavier in terms of bioload, aka the amount of food they eat and the waste they produce, so you'll only want one in a 5-gallon. A snail only 5-gallon tank is pretty darn cool. Maybe add some shrimp in there and you got a nice little community tank going. And finally, the orange Mexican crayfish, also known as the CPO. These small crayfish grow to about 1.5 to 2.5 inches. They're full of personality and don't overload your tank. If you're going to try to keep them in a 5-gallon tank, choose a tank that's shallow in dimension to optimize the surface area at the bottom of the tank. If you do use a 5-gallon, stick to one crayfish only and set up the tank with plenty of hiding spots for when it feels the need to molt. CPOs are pretty hardy and can adapt to a wide range of water parameters, but be sure to do your own research on how to successfully keep these, specifically in a 5-gallon tank. Now, here's where things get a little bit more controversial. Let's move on to the bucket of 5-gallon stocking ideas or species that are constantly debated upon. The recurring point of contention here is this. A lot of these fish I'm going to talk about can survive in a 5-gallon, but critics will argue that they won't necessarily thrive. And when we think about schooling or shoaling fish especially, a 5-gallon tank simply doesn't give them the room or opportunity to undergo that natural behavior. So let's get down to the list. First, Endler's live bears. So people keep a small group of males in a 5-gallon with really no issues. They're hardy, bright, and are always on the move. But that constant movement is exactly why others say 5-gallon tanks can feel cramped, especially for a group of Endlers. On the other hand, a larger 10-gallon tank gives them the room to move about in the way that they naturally would. Avoid adding a female into the mix because even a 10 to 15-gallon tank can feel small and feel small fast with the rate of breeding that can go on. Next, clown killifish. They're calm, tiny surface dwellers, so on paper 3 to 4 in a 5-gallon tank could make sense. However, they are known to feel more secure, show off more natural behaviors, and even color up a little bit better in slightly larger groups. And a 5-gallon just doesn't give you enough space to comfortably keep an adequate amount of clown killies. Moving on. ember tetras. You'll often see people keep 6 to 8 embers in a well-planted 5-gallon and call it a success. But embers are schooling fish, and keeping them in a bigger group lets them move as a unit, show better color, and act naturally, something that's hard to achieve with such a small footprint in a 5-gallon. Up next, chili rasboras. Similar to ember tetras, chili rasboras are tiny and light on bioload, so it's easy to see why keeping them in a 5 is tempting. In some regions of the world, they're even bred in nano tanks. Again, like many of the options listed prior, the opposing camp of hobbyists agree they behave their best in larger shoals where they're confident and vibrant, and a 5-gallon limits how big that group can be. Fifth, rice fish. Rice fish are hardy, peaceful, and even adaptable to cooler water, so they're flexible for tanks. And you'll see often in Japan these being kept in ceramic pots or planters outside, exposed to all the seasons that Japan has to offer, including winter. And the interesting part is that these fish still thrive in those conditions. So would it be possible to keep them in a 5-gallon? Yes, but some hobbyists argue that the horizontal swimming space simply isn't adequate enough. And like I prefaced in the beginning, opinion on this will really vary depending on the region of the world. Next, threadfin rainbow fish. These fish are stunning and can look amazing in a carefully planted 5-gallon tank. The catch? They need groups to feel safe, and males love to display and swim. A 5-gallon usually ends up being too cramped for threadfin rainbow fish to undergo these natural behaviors. And finally, pygmy corydoras. People have kept pygmy cories in a group of 4 to 5 in a 5-gallon, and they've anecdotally done fine. But pygmy cories are true shoalers and love to roam the bottom together in bigger groups. Now imagine putting them in a portrait-style 5-gallon tank. You should definitely avoid that because there really isn't enough space. In a larger tank with 8 to 10 at least, they're way more active, social, and fun to watch. But this large of a group would require a 10-gallon tank at a minimum. Now, let's move on to the last category. The species that are broadly considered poor fits for a 5-gallon by a majority of hobbyists. These stocking options are less controversial in the sense that you should avoid keeping them in a 5-gallon tank in most cases. First up, pea puffers. Pea puffers are tiny and full of personality, so many people assume they'd be okay for a 5-gallon tank. And some hobbyists in the past have kept a single pea puffer in a heavily planted 5-gallon tank, but therein lies the main problem. Pea puffers are not meant to be kept alone. Most experienced fish keepers agree that pea puffers are territorial but also social and do best in groups of usually 3 to 5 or more. And this is important because it allows you to spread that aggression between them. A lone pea puffer becomes stressed, bored, and overly aggressive, which is why it's almost never recommended. Once you keep more than one, a 5-gallon has nowhere near enough space or line of sight breaks to manage territories. Add in their messy high-protein diet and delicate water parameters, and small tanks become a losing battle fast. Since you truly should be keeping these in groups of 3 or more, I personally would only consider a 15-gallon tank minimum. Next up, scarlet batis. Scarlet batis really belong in 10 gallons or larger. Males are highly territorial, and thus you need an adequate footprint for each male and sight breaks to avoid constant harassment, especially if you're keeping a pair. Risk of fin damage and nonstop chasing can happen when these fish are cramped. And thus, the suggested minimum of these would be a 10-gallon or more for one male with females, and larger if you're keeping multiple males together. Moving on, sparkling gourami. Sparkling gourami are often pitched for nanos because they stay tiny. Similar to betta fish, they prefer cover and calm water, but unlike betta fish, they are social anabantoids that do best in groups. So while keeping a betta fish in a 5 is agreed upon, this is definitely not the case when it comes to sparkling gourami. Next up, Lee's killifish. While they are among the smallest fish, they can reproduce and quickly outgrow a 5-gallon tank. The small footprint a 5-gallon provides only makes it harder to keep water parameters stable, which is also especially important for Lee's killifish. And another important point is that the footprint that a 5-gallon provides makes it really hard to keep water parameters stable, which is especially important for Lee's killifish. Given their reproductive potential and social behavior, consider a 10-gallon tank minimum. And lastly, goldfish. You know, this might be extremely obvious for some, but for beginners that are watching, it's worth stating that goldfish are not nanofish. Pretty much any variety of goldfish will grow well beyond what a 5-gallon can support. Juveniles may start small, but they can grow significantly larger. On top of the size, goldfish are extremely messy. They produce high levels of waste due to the constant grazing and lack of a true stomach, and this could lead to constant ammonia spikes, especially in tanks with smaller volumes. A 5-gallon simply cannot provide the filtration capacity, the oxygenation, or the stable parameters needed to keep goldfish healthy. This is why every reputable source recommends a minimum of 20 to 40-gallon tanks depending on the type of goldfish you have. So that is the breakdown when it comes to stocking a 5-gallon tank. Did I miss anything on my list, or do you disagree with anything on my list? Comment down below your thoughts and let's have a healthy discussion in the community. And if you decide that you in fact want to go the Betta fish route, check the video at the end of this video on how to take care of one the right way. Anyways, I shall see you in the next one.